on a central question. As you all know, let's show the Gemara again. Rabbi Shapiro, if you don't mind, or Dr. Lerich, whoever's in charge. The Gemara in Yavamis, you all know, the Gemara says, 24,000, the 12,000 Zugais Talmidim Hayel Rabbi Kiva, Migivas Van Tifras, Akula Mesu, Beperik Echad. Can I get the Gemara back if you don't mind? And the Gemara says, not defining first when this Perik Echad was, and then the Gemara says, in fact, this Perik Echad was between Pesach Atzeres, no mention of like Baimer in the Gemara, no mention of Paschal Lamos, just a very tzarachin agada that lay la'agul kavay deserves that ego forgive us and tifras, which is commonly understood to be from north to south. Very large yeshiva. Mikulan mesu nation nogul kavay zeh. The world was desolate until Rabbi Kiva came. Rabbi Senu Shabadari, Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Lozman, Shemua, Mehem Hem, Shemidu Taira. If not for them, the world would have been desolate. We would not be sitting here because the world would have had no kiyum, because without Torah, the world can have no kiyum. Then the Gemara says they died mi-Pesach ad Atzeres, and they died from a Misa Ra'ah called Askira. In the Chanashir, we had a dialogue with our medical consultant staff. Our doctors on call here, headed by Dr. Lederreich and several other doctors, who discussed exactly what Mrs. Askra could be, the Veldzak diphtheria, but the doctors told me that it could be other things. In any case, it was a Misara. There's a Machshavadik angle here, which I mentioned earlier, which has to be understood. What it means, shall I know, Kavzeh. This will have to wait for another time. There's a beautiful beer from this in David Cohen, one of his farm, Alpi Rabbeinu Amaral. This is the Gemara you all know. And this Gemara, there's no mention of like Baimer. There's no mention of when they stopped. All it says, Kula Mesu Pesach Atzeres. In the Rishonim, first brought in the shame of Reb Zrachi Alevi, and the first mention of Zrachi Alevi, who lived in Provence, and then from there, I guess he was in Girona. Not sure which one he was first, which way he went. The Zrachi Alevi says the first mention of something to do with like Baimer, because he says there's a girsa in the Gemara which says they would niftar me price ha-Pesach, and the word price means half, palaga, price, cut in half of a month. A month is a significant time frame in Chazal. Half of a month means 15 days. Count back from Shul is 15 days to Friday, and that is like Baimer. So they stopped dying at like Baimer, Adkan, a Kabbalah from Rabbeinu Shebisfarad, who got it from the Ga'inim. There was heavy halachic traffic between the Ga'inim, yes, between the Ga'inim in Sfarad, in Bavel, and the early Yishuv in Sfarad. So they sent to Ksav Yad from Bavel, with saying that this is what price Pesach means, and they stopped dying like Baimer. First mentioned the Rishonim. Rabbeinu Amiri follows up on this, and he says, Kabbalah, Mirabisenu, Hagainim, Shabiyim Lam, and Gilon Baimer, Paskulamos. So Rabbi Sai, we now have the first mention of the words of the date, Lag Baimer, and we have the first mention of a reason why Lag Baimer is a Yom of Simcha, because Paskulamos, Rekte Prichadash, in Shulchan Aruch Arachaim. Why is it in Shulchan Aruch Arachaim? Because from this Kabbalah of the Rishonim in Sfarad via Reb Zrachi Alevi and via the Meiri, it ended up going, in this case, east into Germany and ended up in Rabbi Senu Sheba Ashkenaz. And the Maril brings this shmua from Reb Zrachi Alevi that it was price of Pesach and they stopped 15 days before, and therefore Laman Gimel Baimer is Yom Shepasku Lamais. Once it ended up the Maril, it ends up in the Ramah. The Ramah on Taf Tzad Gimel, let's take a look at this. Says, and Sif Beis, Nayagan Shleila Stopper Ad La Gimel Baimer, Sha'uz Amru Shepasku Lamas. So who's the Uz? Amru? Uz Amru is brought in the Torah, which comes from the Sefer HaManik, which cites the Zrachi Alevi, v'chein hi b'meiri, but on Lamed Gimel Ba'omer Paskul Lamois. And therefore, we make it a yontif. Then the Beis Yosef throws in a curveball. However, he says, "Ve'ein l'staper ad lamed dalud b'ayit." Where does this come from? It comes from an unusual source, being the Beis Yosef, which is a drosha from Rabbi Yeshua Ibn Sha'ub, Talmud of the Rajba, who's not normally quoted, as far as I know, in the Mechaber. And he says, he quotes this Zach HaLevi. He quotes also that there's ein l'staper until Ladba Biker. The reason for that is, and the Maril explains it, we count the days that they died. They did not die all 50 days, even though the Gemara says Mi Pesach at Atzeres, because they didn't die in Shabbos, and they didn't die in those days when say Tachna, which is Rosh Chodesh. You take out Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, you're down to 33 days that they died. So they died a full 33 days, and therefore we do not allow to spare us until Lamed Daled Baker. And then this year, Chol Yom Geb Erev Shabbos. Wow. Then Mistaper by Nekvite Shabbos. This is again, I mentioned earlier, a unique candler construction of this year. How often does Geimer fall on Erev Shabbos? As does this year, it has to be Erev Pesach Chol Shabbos for the Geimer to fall on Erev Shabbos, and this is what happens too. And then you can Mistaper by Nekvite Shabbos. Now, this is not a problem for the Rav Ashkenaz, because only Rabbi Sfarad have this problem. Ashkenaz is not a problem at all, because we don't need the heter of Erev Shabbos, because we are Mistaper. When you say El Einaygen Varav El Mistaper Yom Lav Yom Marbek Tzas B'Simcha B'Ein B'Tachnin, and the source here, as you can see, is the Maril and Minhagei Ashkenaz. Ad Kan Dvarim, how you doing? So on this, so far, all we know from the Maril into the Ramah is that Marbek Tzas B'Simcha, and we don't say Tachna. What does this mean? So already by the time of the Ramah, who was a contemporary of the Beis Yosef, was a contemporary of the Rizal, there was something happening on like Baimer, even though there's no mention of this in the Chazal, but it did start in the Rishonim. So the first real development of the concept of the Simcha of like Baimer comes to us, not surprisingly, from the Arizal. There's a little piece of Magen Avraham who quotes it here, Bekitzer Nimratz, and from there it ends up in the Sefer Ateres Akanim, among other sources. Let's see how the Magen Avraham brings it. The Magen Avraham says, "Umar b'iksa simcha v'kasa b'kavonis shegadol echad hayiragol leimer nachem b'chol yoyim v'amu gam b'lag gimel b'ayim v'nenash." Sefer Kavanis is the Sefer Kavanis of the Arizal, written by Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital, the Teiras Arizal comes to us through several sources, most importantly, of course, Reb Chaim Vital and his son Reb Shmuel Vital, in two major Svarim called Pri Tzaddik, not Pri Tzaddik, Pri Etz Chaim and Shara Kavanis. Those are the two major Svarim. This Sefer HaKavanis is when the Magen Avraham refers to that. That's the Sefer of Chaim Vital. From Teres Rizal, he brings a story. So what's the story? So the story in its more entirety is brought here in Sefer Teres Kingdom in the upper left. You'll have to make it much bigger. I'll read it with for the Eilim. Mindigar Yitzral Shemayim Leilach Al Kibbur Rajbi, Rav Elazar ben Benai, on that day. And what happened was that the ages from somebody called Rav Avraham Halevi, who apparently lived in Tzfas. I went through the history with Eilim in the Achana Shir. I'm not going to repeat it again, just to tell Eilim that the Tzfas, in Tzfas, in that Kufa, everybody has a vision that, there was 20 years of interaction, the Beis Yosef and the Malach and the Magid Misharim and the Arizal and all the glittering things that took place in Tzfas. But this is true, except it took place in a much shorter, compressed time frame. The Rabbeinu Arizal lived only 38 years, one of the most incredible accomplishments of anybody in Jewish history with such a short period of time. Moshe Rabbeinu and Akiva lived 120 years, but the Rizal was only Zeichel between Reish Tzadik Daled and Shin Lamed Beis. He came to Tzfas from Mitzrayim. The boys from the Achana Shir know a little bit more about the history of the Rizal, and he came to Tzfas and lived only in Tzfas for 2 years. In those 2 years, the world turned over because the Arizal, we'll see in a second, learned with Chashav Charusis, among them somebody never Shim Ben Yochai, and Rav Shimon was meiser to him all Sisrei Torah, and the Arizal was meiser to the rest of Klal Yisrael ad Seif ad Bias Agayel, all the Minhagei Arizal, which finds such importance in our daily lives. Shulchan Aruch Chaim, through the Shalah, through the Magen Avraham, etc. So in that period, they lived in Tzfas, Rabbi Avraham Alevi, and Rabbi Alevi had a minute to say Nachem in the bracha of Yerushalayim Ercha Barachmim Tashuv, a meaning of Kabbalists. That's what Tzfas was all about. The city of Kabbalists. That was before it became an artsy city of other Michigasin. And in those days, this was a minig to mourn Korban Yerushalayim by saying Nachem. So we say it once a year on Tisha B'Av. They said it every single day. Good. And this Rabbi Alevi was a big tzaddik and did it. Problem is, he said it in like Baimer too. So what happened? Look at this text. What happened was that the Arizal came over to him after davening. Amalei Rav Yitzchak Luria. That's the Arizal. Mishaim Reb Shvi. Wow. How do you like that? Who told this to the Arizal? Shin Beichai. Ichan Shkankashis. They state. Sha'amalei Amar Lishazeh. Shin Beichai told the Arizal, please do me a favor, tell this person, Lamu Amar Nachem B'Yayim Simchasi. Why is this Yid saying Nachem B'Yayim Simchasi? Rabbi Sai, this is the major historical source. We'll see it a bit expanded in a moment, for the fact that like Baimer is Yayim Simchasi of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. L'chein, hu yeh b'nachem b'karev. Why he was nanish in this? I mean, did he get a warning? Was he told not to, but he did it anyway? Or Reb Shimon ben Yochai was so makbid because it was Yayim Simchasi, we do not know. Seems that this Yid was a very chashuv Yid. Nebuch Meslei b'nai Hagadol Vasadegatan. We don't know the exact machshavadik implications of this gripping story. State that Teres Zekanim was one of the Paiskim in Teres after the Magen Avraham. Maresh Ein Leimar Tchina B'Yayim Hazeh. You need a source to be vatal Tachna by sight. You can't just get rid of Tachna whenever you feel like it, or you're in a rush. Tachna for Monday night is a very chashuv and heilig gazach. Without it, wrong word. Without it, according to many Rishonim and Paiskim, Rishon Esther is not complete. So why are we getting rid of Tachlis? You have to have a reason. So Zal will that at certain days, Tachlis is steerer to the Simcha, inherent Simcha of the day, Shabbos, and other days. But you need this to be in the Paiskim. You can't just make up a day and get rid of Tachlis. So where does this come from? And the Ramah says it. The Ramah tells you, and the Ramah didn't make it up. The Ramah got it from the Maril. So there was a Kabbalah already being named from the Gainim through the Rishonim into the Maril, into the Ramah. We don't say Tachnun on like Baimer without telling us why. Says the Pri Chadash, a Bomba Kasha. Pri Chadash says, I don't understand this entire thing. First, he has a kasha on the Mechaber of Lamadal Baimer to Stira. How can like Baimer is a day of Simcha, and then you're not taking haircuts till the next day? Shine. And then he asks a kasha which is worth seeing inside. So if you can kindly put up Pri Chadash or Marcha, I would appreciate it. So you have to set up the kashas of the Rabbi Seinu Rishonim so we can try to offer several approaches to this. So far, everything I've told you, I believe Dvarma you're doing, but it's good to see it packaged. Because when I heard this year, it was always good to see things packaged together, and I'm sharing what I heard with you. So let's see the Pri Chadash. Shulchan Aruch. Pri Chadash is glossing the Ramah. The Pri Chadash says, I don't understand. Okay. Chadash, I believe, maybe earlier. Pri Chadash, Asakasha, if you saw the little blurb there, right there, the Asakasha, if you saw the little blurb that we did the advertising, we wrote like Baimer Simcha Mazoisa, so this is a takeoff from this Pri Chadash. Pri Chadash asked first Akasha, Tema, the Achshav Nagu Bazel Harvest B'Simcha Mishalelam Retachnan. So yes, a kasha on the Mechaber. How is this? Looks to be a tired to the Sasri. Okay, therefore he says, even though I'm talking to Sfardim, I'm a Pri Chadash, or Ben Sulia, and I'm not talking to Ashkenazim, so we have to go with the Mechaber. Doesn't matter. In this case, if you want to go with the Minig Ashkenaz and be Mistaper and like Baimer, since it's the Tarz of the Sasra, he's not going to be Meicha. Fine. Umi actually didactic. The Simcha Zu Lama. What is this Simcha? What is the Simcha like Weimer all about? So they stopped dying. But Rabbi said, what 24,000 Talmidei Rabbi Kiva. And Chazal tell us, Vekulan Mesu Beperek Echad. Every single one of them died in one Perek. Every single one of them died. We have a Megefa, and 24,000 people are wiped out of a city. That's the entire city. We're going to make a yontif because they stopped davening. How does that make sense? If you want to say there was a Megefa and it stopped, if Gedolei Elam were around, if we had Tanaim around, they would tell us whether we should now make a day of Simcha because Klal Yisrael suffered several thousand casualties in the last year, in the Megefa, unfortunately, and our Chugim were terribly hit. So we make a yantif now that we're all here to learn Torah, unlike Baimer. Agav is Baimer Musgar. I saw yesterday, and you can take it for whatever it is. I just state the fact for you neutrally that tomorrow, Friday, tomorrow evening, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, and Friday will be the largest gathering in the world in one place since the Megefa Chmal Itzlan began. We're expecting 1 million people will be around, many more than usual. And it'll be kind of a celebration of the opening up of Eretz Yisrael, which is ahead of us, as you know. The Schus of Eretz Yisrael, every single day. So for some strange reason, this little tiny country in the Middle East managed to get itself open Kenai Nahara before anybody else. Hope it stays that way. And in order as our celebration of the Yeshua of Rabbi Shalom will be in like Baimer this Thursday night, all of Klal Yisrael will celebrate their Eretz Yisrael Mekarav, once Merachaik, still nerve-wracking for reasons I don't have to go into. I know that the Rabbanites are all very nervous. Forget about Corona. They're very nervous about Shabbos. This is already Mimazak the Bissel Hak. But the Prichaj Kasha bleibt. Well, the Simcha, Ma'aza, Asa, what happened in Lag Baimer that precipitates the Simcha? It can't be just because of Paschal Lamus. Naniach, that's a day that we should stop the Avelis because of the Lamus, we understand. Naniach, that all the Cheshbainis of price, 15 days, we understand. Naniach, maybe we don't say Tachnun because of the Avelis stop, we understand. But how does it come from there into a day of Simcha? So you all know that the day of Simcha must be dependent on the fact that Reb Shimon ben Yochai is something. What is it? So far, from what we saw in their Rizal, it is Simchas Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Nowhere yet do we see that it's the yard site of Shimon ben Yochai, and certainly nowhere do we see that on the yard site of Shimon ben Yochai, that's a Machana party with 1 million people, with all the things that Lag Baimer has now, Baruch Hashem, Achshadara, become. What is the makar of this? This kasha is not my kasha. It's not the kasha of the blogs or the weeklies. It's the kasha of Maran Rabban from Sefer and the Shalom Meshiv. In a well-known tshuva, in Yeridea, Simon Shin Lam and Gimel, some Sefer says, you know, Achshav. It's worth taking a look at a few lines of some Sefer. Achshav, Achshadari, and everybody starts going up to Meron. This took place. This is Sefer writing all the way back in the 1820s. So this minhag of going to Meron did not start recently. I mentioned the Achana Shir. Some Sefer says that I'm not going. Was it so easy to go? There's such big fruits of people going from Pershberg to Meron as there is now. You know, not Punk today, but in years past, Mesichnish. But here's the Tshuva in Reish Lamed Gimel. And in the paragraph beginning, Amnon, some Sefer says, you're on the right page. Amnon Nidaiti Kishamati Shachshav Achshadari. Mimerchi Lay Redishim Bierkai Svasiam Gabaim Balud Rabbi Shimon Bimki Kol Kavanas L'Shem Shemayim. They're all fine, good Jews. Scham Rabbi Safek. Okay, the Sefer was the ultimate diplomat. Avon B'Tam Zem Ba'atzmi Ayisi. I would not go. I would go from the Prushim Commander Isai, all the Berlitz decorate, Sham, Sham. Mashanim and Agam, I don't want to go and tell him off, so therefore I'm not going. Why not? Ask some cipher, where does this yontif come from? Can't just make a yontif in Klal Yisrael. There's no source in Chazal for this. There's no source in the Paiskim for this. And therefore, he says, some cipher then goes through a long arichas here in Kabbalah, talking about how the Bible is Haid Shemahid, whatever that means, as you know, in the spheres. And the Chum Sefer knew what it means. Chum Sefer was one of the great Kabbalists of his generation, learned this from his Rebbe Nosson Adler. But Chum Sefer says, Mitals, I don't know what's going on here. Look at the next page. Mikol Makayim, L'asaysa Yoim Simcha, V'hadlaka. No, it's further down. Here we go, in the second yellow. Freeze it there, please. I don't know. Come last is come last says James Simba luck and what can do dash. He'll tell fish come every ganze Welt, people should go there. Again, Masha Kasra Bach Mishnah Kevish Navi. Then he goes into other issues. Life was not happy with this. The Shalom Mesha writing in Lemberg was even much unhappier, and he in Madura Hay Simon Lamates says, I don't get it. He says, if in fact if we're talking about the day that Rav Shimon Yochai died, we should be fasting. And Zayin Adar we fast. HaRav, he says, B'mais, let's see if we can find the exact text, the exact 2 lines we need. He brings the story of Nachem, he brings the Magen Avram, 6 lines to the bottom. From the top, 6 lines to the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, maybe, I don't know, only Dr. Letterach can produce 2 colors in the. Oh yeah. Look at that. Bemis Kamshon Tamiti. I'm sorry, I underestimated the Rabbi Shapiro. There are Rabbi, but my start with Chacham Yashlis Anais. On Vasalam, he said to Zikim, Milan Godel Miraisharai Behemna. And on the day of Zayin Adar, we fast. There's no parties in Zayin Adar. The Chaver Kadishas are fast in Zayin Adar. Zayir Kari Lul Rabshi. Here comes a first mention. And going back all the way to the Zayir. In fact, in the Zayir state, I let Shabbat Simcha. Maybe it means that Rav Shimon Yochai was happy. Why? Because he was going to Gan Eden to talk to Moshe Rabbeinu and to his Rebbe Kiva, who was murdered by the Romans a few years earlier. They were both in hiding at the same time, but they caught Rebbe Kiva at the end of his life, 120 years in the Sarku, sorry, but Misreika Shel Barzel. So what is the Simcha here? In the day that he died, and his Alula, Megdaf Machen Ataines. And it was happy for him, but Aisanu Azav La'anuchais. And he says, I have a lot to say in this. Here, writing here from Lemberg, he was a misnagid, but he stopped. Okay, Adkan. So where does the Simcha come from? So Rabbi Sai, I mentioned earlier that from the fact that Rav Shimon Yochai had a day of Simcha on Lag Baimer, that starts from this shtickle in the Arizal. We have it brought in the Shar Kavanais. It says the Arizal went in Shin Lamed 2 years, Shin Chav Ches, 2 years before he came there to, no, he died in Shin Lamed Daled. You get the year straight. He died in Shin Lamed Beis. He's Nifter Shin Lamed Beis. In Av of Shin Lamed Beis, What's the Arizal's yard site? Somebody remind me. It was Nifter in that year. Hey Av, I think. And the Arizal came to Tzfas from Mitzrayim in the year Shin Lamed. The ganze Yishuv of the Arizal in Tzfas was 2 years. In 2 years of Chaim Vital like Mosh Yot Mitachas Yada, he didn't budge. 2 years of Chaim. The Rizal taught Rav Chaim Vital Kol Sisrei Torah. Where did the Rizal learn it from? He learned from Shimon Yochai alone. Moshe made a nest, Gully, in order that Klal Yisrael should have Kabbalas, Rav Shimon Yochai, Nishrash, into our firmament and to our lach, as I mentioned, and all this took place over these 2 years. In those 2 years, this story happened. 2 years before that, the Rizal lived in Mitzrayim. I don't remember what I said in which segment. But the Arizal was a business person. We have autographic proof of letters to that effect. And he, in the Yershin Chavches, he and his entire Pamalia made a visit, a bikur, from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael, Tzfas, and they stayed an entire week in Meron. And the kever of Shir Beni Chai, once, 2 years before he moved to Eretz Yisrael. Sorry, not a whole week, 3 days. I mentioned earlier, maybe this is Dominic for some Svadish and Mekubalim today, and they go this week and they stay there, Lavdafka, Baimer. And this is the first time when he came from Mitzrayim, was apparently, I don't know, it was his first trip to Eretz Yisrael, not clear. You'd have to do a lot more research to know this. It's not so hard to do that today. If you have time, you can just do this research on your own exactly in the history of the Arizal. And the Arizal was made that this is, in fact, the kever of Rav Shimon ben Yochai. That's how we know that it is. And he says that he said the story of Nachem and Rav Ram Alevi, that unfortunately he said Nachem on Yaim Sim Chasiv Layatza Chedesh Yamim Achel Meslei Ben Echad Kibel Olav Tanchumim. Says the Rabbi Yonason, says the Talmid of Rabbi Chaim Vital, that I'm writing this because the Chasafti Kolzeh to tell you that there's a Shirish Nisminig, and Rav Shimon ben Yochai was one of the 5 great Talmid of Rabbi Akiva, and therefore, in Zman Simchasai, Lavan Gilbaimer Adkan. Still do not have any source for Baisai that Zman Simchasai means that he was neftar and Lag Gilbaimer. Rabbi Akiva was one of the 5 Talmidim that were nismach, according to Chazal, not by Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva taught them. They were nismach after that by Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. If you look in the Sarug Malchus, all these Tanaim are bundled together one time, but they lived, the Sarug Malchus Piyut took place over a period of 60 or 70 years. Some of them were Rabbeim, some of them were the earlier ones, there was Whale, Kiva, later ones. This is a shmooze for another time, maybe closer to Tisha B'Av and the history of what took place in that unfortunate, horrible Tekufa when the Romans were trying to stamp out Klal Yisrael. We'll talk about that at the end of today's share a bit. So until then, until that time of the result, we have Edus, that it was a day, the Simcha of Shimon ben Yochai. But we don't know yet that it was, quote unquote, his yahrzeit. That was brought to us by Direi Kabbalah. I mentioned this at the end of the Chana share. Maybe some of you heard this part. I'll rattle it off quickly. Many Gedol Yisrael subsequently, starting with Benis Navish and Tiaris Tavash and Chelik Beis, Drush and Aleph, you can see it there. And the Hesped, he said in Altuna in the years Tuf Kuf Chav Beis, and he says, like Weimer, is the Yom Hilula, Rav Shimon ben Yochai, Ki Meis Az, he died on that day. And this is backed up by the Chida, who was also obviously a Kabbalist, and Kabbalah Sarizal, the Bnei Saschar, who was already a Hasidic Kabbalist, who says clearly that Rav Shimon ben Yochai was Niftar and Lamed Gilm Ba'omer, and Mustami was born that day for obvious reasons. Rab Tzadok Akayim Blablin in Sefer Pri Tzadik, many other sources, the Balatanya, many other sources, including, surprisingly enough, the Chai Adam, the ultimate Misnagid writing in Vilna, that he heard a Kabbalah in Vilna, that Lamed Gilm Ba'omer is Yom Hilulad Rashbi, L'chvaydai Naigin Ksas Simcha Umiyaz. It became a couple in Klal Yisrael. This was the day that Rav Shimon ben Yochai was nifter, which raises the question of the Bri Chadash. Not Niach, Rav Shimon ben Yochai was nifter that day. It was Simcha Maza Isa. Why are we making a party, and why are we not being Misana that day? And the Kasha followed up by the Kasha of some Sefer, I'm not going to Meron, and followed up by the sharp attack of the love of the Shalom, we should be fasting on Lag Baimer, whether or not we're saying Tachman. So we'd like to offer an approach here, Rabbi Sai, which, full disclosure, was published by Makira Miyadai, a very chashuv chayker named Moshe Bloy. And 15 years ago, I was in the Sifrei Alomit in Yerushalayim, looking at some Kisvei Yad, and he came over to me, maybe more, 16 years ago, and he said, I have an article for you with a big Kiddush I found in the last few months. I said, okay, I'm happy to look at it. It turned out that, in fact, it was an incredible Kiddush And it was published in Yeshurun Tezvav, which happens to be the Sefer Zakarim from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. You can find it online. It's not a print, but you can find it online. And there's a member there called Yom Lam Gimel Ba'imra Kiyam Simcha by Moshe Isaac Blay. I'm going to tell you what he says, that it's a fascinating Kiddush, which the Da'ati has a lot of Nikar and different emes to it, because it kind of makes everybody in Klal Yisrael happy, trying to be Ma'achid Chassidim and Misnagdim, which was one of the hallmarks of Moreinu Rabbeinu, the Baladas Yaakov, the Minsker Rebbe. And let's talk about what is actually the correct source here in the Sefer Pri Etz Chaim. Pri Etz Chaim was put out not right away after the Chaim Vital's Tira. It came out several years later with several Maduras. The one which is most nafutz was printed by Rav Meir Pap Urosh in the year Tuf Kuf Mem Hey. The first earlier print was Tuf Kuf Mem Beis. That's the first print, Tuf Kuf Mem Beis, years after Tira of Chaim Vital. Sat around in Ksav Yad for a while. And the Shar Kavanis, that was written by Nata Reb Chaim Vital, by Reb Shmuel Vital, his son, was published in Tuf Reshid Beis. So this was very, very long gaps in between the actual recitation of this material from Rabbeinu Rizal until it actually got into print, which always causes problems, because the more a sefer is used, the more it is mugah. The more a sefer is used, the more it is mugah. So when there's a gap, problems can happen. Okay, so what's the issue here? The issue here is that in the text that we have, as you can see here in the paragraph Sefer Pri Etz Chaim, the text that we have near Mikol Makom, which is Shorish Li'Yitzia Zu, Batam Shemeis Rav Shimon Galei B'Yam Gil B'Aimer, Q Talmid Rabbi Akiva Anal Shemeisu B'Sfir Saimer Anal. Okay, that we died between Pesach and Ateres, indisputable, they state in Gemara. That Reb Shimon Yochai, who was a Talmid Rabbi Akiva, died in Lam Gil B'Aimer, das steht nicht. So where does this come from? So for this, we have to look a little bit further, and this is a bit regaful issue. I'm making full disclosure. This is the kind of thing that I and Chaykum Tarani like, but not everybody necessarily does. So let's see if I can put it down in a way which is nichel kol. According to Rabbi Blay here, there was a Toy Cipher, a big Toy Cipher, in the original Ksav Yad of the Pri Etz Chaim, which is the source for the ganze Yisod, that there was a simcha that Rav Shimon Yochai died on Lag Baimer. Remember, the only source we have for this is the Pri Etz Chaim. And he says, if you look in the Shara Kavanais, that Shin Lam Gimel Baimer is named Simchas Rav Shimon Yochai. However, if you look in the, as I said, that's from the Pri Etz Chaim. Look in the Shara Kavanais, parallel Sefer. There's no mention that Rav Shimon Yochai died there. All it says is that Reb Shimon Yochai had a simcha on Lag Bimel Ba'Aimer. What does the word simcha mean? So let's see if the language in the text backs us up. So on Tuf Samachay here, on page Tuf Samachay, it brings you what could be a very startling thing here. And if you look in line 4, Yesh Gears to Shina, give me the yellow marker. Higam Rajbi, Hayimetamir Rabbi Akiva. And look at the next word. Usamach B'la Gimel Ba'Aimer. What's the text that Klal Yisrael has been samach on for many, many hundreds of years? The text that Klal Yisrael is samach on, have you ever heard? Yes. The text that we are samach on was Hu Shemeis B'la Gimel Ba'Aimer. That's the whole source for Yom Snayvishitz, and for the Chida, and for the Pnei Saschar, and for the Pri Tzadik, and for the Balatanya to say that Lam Gil B'Aimer is the day of Hilul of Shimon Yochai. But here we have another alternate text which says he didn't die that day. He was Seimeach B'la Gimel B'Aimer without any mention that he died that way. A riot to that is the story brought Gufa from the Shara Kavanis in the Magad Ram and the Ateres Zekanim. where there it says that the Hamaisa Hanal, and doesn't say Rav Shimon Yochai died. It says Rav Shimon Yochai told the Arizal to tell Rav Avraham Alevi that this is Yom Simchasi. Doesn't say Yom the day that I died. Yom I died. It just says Yom Simchasi. And the question is, what about this discrepancy in this Gesaris, which looks to be world class? So here's a Chiddush of Rabbi Blay in the library of Rav David Oppenheim, well-known Goyen in Germany, also Goyen, and he was also a Sar. His collection ended up in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. There is a Ksav, and there the Girsa of the story of Avraham Alevi, which is the Makar for the entire Neo of Klal Yisrael, that like Ba'omer is the source of the Yard site of Shimon Yochai. We have the text, and here's the text. Amalei Lishazeh Shalama Oimer Nachem B'Yom Simchasi. V'tam Shin Mem, which you'd assume is Shemes Reb Shimon will be Yom Lag Ba'omer. Kiyutim B'Kramer Shu Shemes Lag Ba'omer. Nermi calls the Yesher Sharish Bay. That's the text of the story brought in the Shar HaKavonos. Here comes the Chiddush. This was a Toy Sefer. If you look in the text in the Ksav Yad, I'll show you in a second. It says Shin Mem Streichel. Hear this, Rabbi Said? On the bottom, you can see all the cited literature. The text is on the next page. Let's go. For those of you who have never done this before, I'm going to learn with you Ksav Yad. He says, Gamakana Olcham Al Kibbur of Shem Gamliel. It's hard to read these things unless you have training. This Rabbi Said, it's even hard for me. Al Biram Yal Gam Ba'omer, Aniri Isi Limayri Zal, that's the Arizal. Gimel Shot and Amr Shahisa Sham, with Anshe Beisai, they were all there and they stayed there for 3 days. And then he tells you the story about Avraham Alevi, the sad story of Avraham Alevi. He says he used to say Nachem Beberchas Tishkain. If you can just follow on line 3 with the marker, Rabbi Mordechai. The Kashasim at Tefillah Omer Meiri, my Rebbe said, that's the Arizal, Shem Reb Shvi. Tell these people, Shalmahu Omer Yom Simchasi Umisham. What's the next word of I say? Make this a different color, maybe, or whatever. The next word. Okay, everybody see that thing there? Yeah. Okay. For years, Gans Klal Yisrael took that Shem and Yisrael and made it to Shemes. The Chiddush Mechkar Tarani of Rabbi is that word means not Tam Shemes, it means Tam Simcha Rav Shimon ben Yochai. That's the Girsa Amitis. This is backed up by Savyav Kachai, Rav Shmuel Vital, that he found, where it says another atok of this, and there the Lashon is Yaim Shemu Aseinu, and not as it is printed Yaim Simcha Seinu. So all of a sudden, not only is it not Yaim Shemes, it's not even on the next page. It's impossible to read in a screen, so I see it. It's not even an issue of there's a Ksavia, but it's too hard to read. So I'll just tell you what it says. It says Yaim Shemu Aseinu. It's not Yaim Simcha Seinu. It's not Yaim Shemes, not Yaim Simcha Seinu. So what's going on here? So his thesis is that what's going on here, and this is a startling chiddush, that the Ganze Lag Ba'omer is based on a different prong. The Ganze Lag Ba'omer is based on the Simcha of Lag Ba'omer. What's the Simcha of Lag Ba'omer? The Simcha of Lag Ba'omer is that it was a Chag HaSmicha. This is the day, the Simcha is Yom Shmu Asai, as Shmuel Vital writes, because after the Misa of Talmid Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai was Nismach with the other 4 great Tanoim, and the Olam was Shamim, and from that day on, Torah was restored to Klal Yisrael. As the Chidah says, on the 33rd day of Lag Ba'omer, the Chidah says, Hischol Ishmais l'Rashbi, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, V'ya'ir le'em, she'atagzar atayr, lekach eisim simcha, gansanaya, approached Lag Ba'omer by saying, nothing to do with Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's yard site. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, as far as we know, did not die on Lag Ba'omer. And if he would have, but the Kasha some cipher and the Shalom Yeshu would be accurate. Why are we not fasting? But he didn't die. Adarabba. He died sometime. We don't know exactly which day he died. He didn't die between Pesach and Shavuos because he wasn't of those 24,000 Talmidim. He must have been younger or whatever. It wasn't there. It was not included in those who were laid in Lago Covenants, whatever that means. So what happened to Lag Baimer, if I say? What happened to Lag Baimer was Torah was restored to Klal Yisrael. It was the day that Rabbi Kiva, and I'm not saying this, even Rabbi Blai's not saying this, Chida is saying this. Lashon Chida is, V'yayim Lamed Gimel Hischel Lishnei Rabbi Shimon Yochai Rabbi Meir. To all these Talmidim, I don't know if we have some ches, should have copied it. Lashon Chida in Chuvas Tayvai, and there you can see it says Yayim Shmo is saying. Is that the last page we have? I'm sure. You'll listen to me, Rabbi say. Yayim Lamed Gimel Hischel Lishnei Rashbi and his fellow Talmidim, the most chashuv Tanaim in Klal Yisrael, or Meir Beisi, and therefore, like Boimer, was the Chag Smicha. The day when they didn't get the Smicha yet, they got from Bida Bava. The day that they started learning Torah, opening of the new yeshiva in Daraim, Yavne, wherever it was, and Memela, that's the day of Simcha. Not only is this not the Chiddush Chidah, Kadmai, the Pri Chadash. If you remember at the beginning of the Shia, I read your Pri Chadash. And the Pri Chadash says, Efshra Simchi al Eisen Talmidim, Sha'isiv Achakach Rabbi Kiva Shloi Mesu. So Rabbi say, we have a total Pan Chadash, a new Ashnev Chadash, a new blick. And they got the story of Lag Baimer. According to the Rishonim Paschal, no problem, no question. Nothing to do with Rav Shimon ben Yochai. That's why we don't say Tachnan and Lag Baimer. But the Tamim is brought in the Sefer Manig from the Balamayr, Zereshane, and came into Halacha. But what does it have to do with Yartzeh Rav Shimon ben Yochai? Nothing. Because the source of the Yartzeh Rav Shimon ben Yochai is there, Rizal, in the Shar Kavanis. And there it says that he died on Lag Baimer. But it's not true. He didn't die like Baimer. Lag Baimer is the day of Simcha Soi. What is the Simcha Rav Shimon ben Yochai? I mentioned I'm not getting now into any chas v'shalom, any aspersions. Just like Chaim Sofer, a billion miles over my head said, everybody who goes to Miron, what's his lashon here? Vadai, they are the what's the lashon? Achshar Dari and a Vadai, Kavanasam Marol, it's L'Shem Shemayim Ritzuya. Everybody's fine. They'll be celebrating on Thursday and Friday. But they're really celebrating something else that may not even know about it. They're celebrating the restoration of Torah to Klal Yisrael. Because the Eilam is Shamim, as I state in Gemara, and Shamim means desolate. The world would not have been able to be Mekuyim since there was no Torah. The Romans killed every Talmud Chacham Israel. The Askara, killed every Talmud Chacham Israel against the Roman moment. And the Eilam was Shamim believed Torah. State that a moment of no learning Torah in the world blows up, cannot exist without Torah and Tosha. And it was Besufik. Rekiva was still alive, said it was Torah. But the next Torah was Besufik. The Rekiva Mistama Nuba Nevuah, that he was going to be Nekad al Kiddush Hashem. Shimon ben Yochai himself had to run away and hide in the cave for 13 years on a lam from the Roman authorities. Therefore, on the day that Rekiva restored Torah to the world, and kept the world alive, that's the biggest Simcha of Shimon ben Yochai. And therefore, everybody at Yisrael went there, and this is the lesson of the Mishas Chasidim, Rabbi Noah Chai Riki, writing in Taf Mem Zayin to Taf Kuf, Kadmain, says it, Kamat Beforish, that the Elam was in the sky, and Lefichach Ein Lesabel B'yayim Zel, Mitzvah L'Smeach, Simchas Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Rabbi Sai. The Simcha of Hashem Yochai is the restoration of Torah, even though it's Barer. The day of Lav Gimel Eimer Tas Reiv Shainim Zayim Simcha, because that's when they stopped dying. Nishkan Stira. Many times more said in addition to this, the Marsha has a famous word that most of the day is Sphira, which connected Shakal connected the Shneis Chayiv Adam. Some say for himself says that this is the day that the month started coming down. This is already several different additional shiur of this. But Al Kalpana Rabbi said we now can be miyash of the Minich Yisrael to make a simcha like Ma'imr. There's no makom for the taina of the Shalom Meshem, the other Achrayim, the taina of the day of Patiris Tzadikim should fast because Lamaisa, we have no source of Shimon ben Yochai died on like Ma'imr. All we know is that it's a day of simcha of Rav Shimon bar Yochai. And the day of Simcha Rav Shimon bar Yochai is the day when Rav Shimon bar Yochai had the schus of learning from his Rebbe Rabbi Akiva and making sure that today, on Erev like Baimer, Tafshin Pei Aleph, several thousand years later, we're still here to be able to learn Torah because the factor of Yedidi, Michal Dalsman. Why punct to Simcha Rav Shimon bar Yochai, not the other? So for them, Daf Mishnah Baki in Kabbalah. I'm assuming that the answer to that is that Rav Shimon bar Yochai was the prime wearer of the two hats. Chvesis, what took place there, but we know that Rav Shimon bar Yochai had the nishmas of who knows whom, because in addition to being in Nigla on the rank of the other Talmidim, as we know from all of Shas, I once heard a Milsa Bedichasa, can't remember whether I said this year or this year before, named Rav Steinman. Steinman was asked if you want to go to the camera like Baimer and the Miron, and for a Ben Yeshiva, and he said only if you're sure that you know that the Reb Shimon there is the same Reb Shimon as in Shas, and make sure you learn the Reb Shimon in Shas. So I think Reb Michal, the answer to that is, the Pashta Balbatash answer to that is, that I can offer as a Pashta Balbas is, in addition to Nigla, Reb Shimon bar Yochai also had Nistar, which not everybody was zeicha to. I'm not sure that Rameir, as great as he was, who might have talked about Rameir, but maybe he wasn't as great as Reb Shimon bar Yochai and Nistar, and therefore the Torah needs both the chelik and nigla and a tail and nistar, and that's why it's michas to Rav Shimon bar Yochai more than the other Tanaim, even though it is a good order that you're asking. And therefore, today miyuchad to Rav Shimon bar Yochai and his colleagues. Okay, not a kasha and Chsav Sefer and Mishael Meshiv, not a kasha and Mishael Meshiv. What it is. I'm going to include this segment of just quoting you, a backup to this, an introduction to the next segment. So I'm going to ask permission here, since I get a chance to do this only rarely, to keep you a little bit later, 2 minutes over 1 o'clock, because I want to introduce you to a whole nother prong here, which is an interesting speculation. I'll put it on the table for you. You'll decide yourself how you want to deal with this. I'll close this segment with a tzitut from a shtickle from Charles Truth's Shem Arya. The name, the Shem Arya was, his name was Arya Leibish Bolachover. He lived from the years Tuf Kuf Samach Aleph Tuf Reish Mem Aleph, courtesy of the footnotes on this Ma'amer in Yeshurun. And he says the Simcha of Rav Shimon bar Yochai was Miyuchad Rav Shimon bar Yochai. By the way, here is the on that page there. Okay, the Shem Arya. I won't have time to go through it inside. I'll tell you what it says. Maybe a few lines. Go back to the previous page with the Kisvayad there. There you go. There's the Shar Kavones with the problematic line at the bottom. Everybody see those two lines on the bottom? Tam Shemesh Rav Shimon bar Yochai Lag Baimer. According to Rav Bloy, that's this type, big world shocking kiddush. It should say Vatam Samach, not Shemes. Okay, so the Shemaria, let me tell you what it says outside, because I'm not gonna have time to say inside. Let me summarize it. He says that the day of Lag Baimer is a simcha, because that's the day Rav Shimon bar Yochai was nitzel from the malchus that will geyser of a terrible freeze it there. This is the Sefer Chemes Yam. This is a sideshow here, but I didn't mention this because one of the sources, in addition, etc., is preceding him was Sefer Chemes Yam. Sefer Chemes Yam is a problematic sefer. It's more than the Kamayim and the Peskim, not Kamayim, the Peskim. But there were pikpukim on the Sefer Chemes Yam. Some of your scholars may know this, and therefore there were accusations that some of the material there is Sabadian, therefore whether he was a Shabsai or not. But here is another source. Just to learn their Kaddish in the Lail of like Goodbye. Okay, and the Chemes Yam is of questionable provenance. I'll come on. Going back to the Shemariah to introduce our next issue here, the next and final issue. Said the Shemariah, the Simcha of Shimon bar Yochai was because he was Nitzal from the Mulchama, the Gzeira that the Romans were guys, as we saw several places, Shas, Shabbos, Tafel, Gimel. But why Punkt Baimer? Because Shemariah follows the standard that he was nifton that day. Why? Because he says Aruge Malchus are not Nikvar, but he was Nikvar. And therefore, they made this a day of Simcha, which was a Giluy on the Ness, that he was died and he wasn't killed by the Romans. Shimon Yochai escaped the Romans. He was in the cave for 13 years, as you know. The Romans never nailed him. They got his Rebbe, Rebbe Kiva, but they didn't get him. And he was Baruch Yamim after the Gezerah, and he died of natural causes, and he was Zeichel Kfura. Who knows what happened to Rebbe Kiva? We know what happened to Rebbe Kiva because we have Rebbe Kiva's caver. So even though the Romans murdered him, but Klal Yisrael was Zeichel to have at least Rebbe Kiva's brought to Kever Yisrael, as we all know, since many of us was Zeichel to be on his caver. So Shimon lived, and he died in a normal way, and was Zeichel Kfura, and therefore, says the Shemariah was sus and sameach on the nest that was done to him that the Romans never got him, and he was brought to Kvura and then daf machna bracha, and that's the whole simcha of Lag Baimer, because that's the day of the Kavayat for Lag Baimer, because of his importance in all of history. And he brings a Rashi in Yavamis and daf Kufchav Beis, brings the Chuvas Gainim at the day of Mesa of Adam Gadol. All the Chacham come together from all his Svivav and Meshiv and Yeshiva al Kivrei. Everybody say as a Agav, just to hope you don't mind me mentioning this, we were able to Zeicha to put out the Sefer Zikaron of Mitzvah Rebbe in the last Yeshurun. It's available now if you want. Dr. Lederach can give you Bigaliz's number and you can get it from there. Why? We try to get it out for the art site, because this Rashi Nevamis Tav Kuchav Bey says in the day of Adam Gadol's Nisan is the art site. All Chacham come together and the Meshav Yeshiva Kibra. We can't do that. Can't physically go out as they did in the time of the Tanoim and have a conclave at the Kibbur of a Tzaddik. So we did the next best thing was to put together the Torah of the Rebbe into a beautiful Sefer Zikaron. And I'm mentioning this because there's very few of them left. So if you want one, you have to get it quickly. So upon him, that's what they did in Meron. The whole party Meron comes the fact that Chachamim got together to be Kaveya and learn the Torah Reb Shimon, I guess both Benigla and Benister, and this is how it all Meron comes. Okay, everybody says. So now we mentioned the Romans. I will tell you interesting Mahalach here. I'm not taking balance in this Mahalach. I'm just telling it to you. Let's start here with a fascinating Imra from Rav Henkin. Rav Mordechai, if you can put up the shtickle. Okay, so my Yedidi, or Daniel Kleiman, spent a lot of time in the last years reprinting the halachic works of Henkin, but this is a sefer that was printed, that he did not reprint, called Medrash Elio, which is the Kovetz Torani, and it had a mime from Henkin, in which it says, in the Mesila, which was written in the year Tafshin Beis, which is 1942, in the middle of the war. Henkin was here, and look what he says. Aminik shall mix us avail Sphira. Sherasha Bigmamisim Samach Beis, all understood. Look in the second paragraph. Venira Levaer Al Tiaremes Vahamusar. Agam, listen to this paragraph and don't jump. After the Gemara, stop Mashma Merkib Mesel Mitzayim Ba'askara, as I state in Gemara. This is not me talking, this is not a Chayker talking, this is a guy of Yosef Leo Henkin. Hine, Maragala Befia Elam. Shall Talmidi Rabbi Akiva Hishtatfu b'Muhammad's Beitar Bimei ben Kuziva Margal and Pi'ayla, that the Talmidi Rabbi Akiva Mishtatef in the Mered. So you all know the basics. Rabbi Akiva incorrectly Ich zog das yesterday said Chazal was Derish Derech Keich Meyachayv on Bar Koichva, who turned out to be Ben Kuziva, and he led the rebellion. Rabbi Akiva was his halachic and Torah mentor. Rabbi Akiva gave his stempel to this merit. Shalafi Derei Rambam, which we'll see inside in a moment. Rabbi Akiva Neisei Caleb Shalben Kaziva, whatever that exact word means. It can't be like the Neisei Caleb of Yonason physically, but he was his mentor. I said, All it says in Shas is they died. This is accurate. And umigives varantipras, which is the lashon of the Gemara, Yavamais Makam Misison Shaltimir Kiva is Elefi Derem Mekaimis Alachama Sham Nitnu Lekvura. Wow, that's all he says. What a shocking statement. So what's the backup for this, Rabbi Sai? Normally you'd say this would be written by a chayker, and because according to this is not what the Gemara says and not what it means. The Gemara says Kula Mesa Askara. Now we're learning that they didn't die from Askara, they died from participating in a war. That is something that no one can just toss off without some sort of a makar to this. The first makar he brings here is the Rambam. Yes, it's true. The Rambam says what he says. Let's see. Famous Rambam, in which the Nisa Kalim themselves are wondering where the Rambam got this from. The Rambam, as you can see here, look in the bottom of the note here, when he cites the Rambam. It's now 1 o'clock, and I know I'm gonna go over time. So everybody who needs to go, please do. Anyone wants to hear, listen to the story, which will take another 10 minutes. It's up to you. Malachim Yeral's base. We'll see inside in a moment. Go back to the note. Just want to show you the literature in the note. Kesser Mishnah wants to know where it got, and he quotes his Sefer HaYochsin, which says there's no such a thing in Midrashim. Where did the Rambam get that he was Ben Nisa Caleb Ben Kaziva? And then found a source. The Pharisee Yisrael in the Goyim of all places says Ukipshutai. Wow. And then he brings the Siselos al Kabbalah, which we'll have to talk about in a moment. So let's see the Rambam quickly. The Rambam and Achen says this, but the while we get the Rambam, you know, the Chayker have a problem with the Gemara Yavamis, which to us is not a problem because it's an Agadata and we don't ask Kashas in Agadata Chazal. But the Chayker of Kasha, how is it possible that all the Talmidim died and Rav didn't die? We all know that infectious Magefas, everybody dies. And how is it possible that we have no record of this Magefa and only 24,000 people died and no one else died in Eretz Yisrael because we have no record of this? Kasha for us, as we know, if Kadosh Baruch Hu wants to send out Inish to these Talmidim for whatever what they did, Ruma Alasam, not a kasha to us that only they died because, you know, in the original Magefa in the Midbar, they Mason Magefa, none of all Klai Yisrael died. Whoever died because Kadosh Baruch Hu decided they should die. Okay, all these kashas are scholarly kashas, but Rav Henkin seems to take this svara seriously. Okay, so is there a problem to find the Rambam? It's in a different package. Not sure who is. No, it's we had it here. The Rambam was here in the first package. Guess we're sure to get to that in a second. Here we go. Top line. Nice Kel shall ben Kaziv Melech. Aimer Alev Shu Hamelech HaMashiach. B'dimahu Chol Chachmei now Rebbe Kiva. Shu Hamelech HaMashiach Shnerg B'Vaynais. Kivin Shnerg Ner Shalai Mashiach. Okay, so the Kesser Mishnah asks. We have the Kesser Mishnah's page. And that's the Kesser Mishnah asks, Meichate, so what did the Moreno and Rambam get? That what did the Rambam get that he was then we arrive at okay. Bottom line. Basha customer Kiva nice to Kelvin Sir. What does the Rambam know this from? Upon him, we now know that there was a Mered and Bar Kaziva was backed up from Rebbe Kiva. So this scholarly approach, which Rav Henkin alludes to, and he brings a makar to this in the Deres Rishonim, was that the 24,000 Talmid Rebbe Kiva were signed up into the Maradim, into the army, the Maradim of Bar Kaichua, and there's all sorts of bells and whistles attached to the shtickle Torah. Many of them were Bachrim, which makes sense in the yeshiva. And they decided not to marry during the Kufa of the Mered because they didn't want to be Meshachrar from the army of Naki Lebeisa Shana Achas. So they stayed Bachrim. Unfortunately, the Mered, as you know, was a total disaster. And according to this approach alluded to by Rav Henkin, they all wiped out. And they were wiped out not by Mrs. Askara. That's an illusion, Chazal, according to them. They were wiped out by the Romans. Chazal did not want to state that the Romans killed them for whatever reasons. Not sure why. There are many other places in Shas where Chazal had no problem stating the rishus of the Romans, including most famously the wiping out of Beitar, where 1 million people were killed. But this is this Mahalach here, which I'm just sharing with you without in any way endorsing it. And therefore, since a lot of them were died without B'nai Zug, this is how academic Mechka works. Therefore, this is the Mekar not to make chassanis between Pesach and like Baimer, to take into account the tzidkus of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, who died in that kifa, many of them Bachrim. The ones who were married, their wives had to stay home, and they were not Isik in Malacha at night to be able to see their husbands when they came home for a short visit on leave. And he says, this is the place where the Makar, the minig, that women don't do Malacha and Yemei Sfira from Shkias Achama at night, similar to Yemei Chanukah. Shem Rechai, of course, was the Geidel Talmid of Rabbi Akiva. As we said, he escaped Derech Nes. He did get married, as we know. He had a son, Shem ben Elazar, and the story ends with, at least with Reb Shimon. Well, and this is the reason for the Minig Yisrael to go out with arrows, bows and arrows on Lag Baimer, because it is a remes to the war against the Romans. Rabbi Sai, I put this out for you. Rav Henkin does mention it. If you look in the sources that Rav Henkin mentions, and I'll show you a couple. The first is the backup, the scholarly backup of this is a one line in the Gersh of Shir line we have here. You find the Shir line. There we go. Shir guys, Rabbi Akiva Talmidim Harbe, Vushmada al Talmidim Rabbi Akiva. Vusamchid Yisrael al Talmidim, and he talks about Rabbi Akiva giving him Kulam Mesa Pesach Betzeres Vel B'Shamim. And what does those words mean? Vushmada al Talmidim Rabbi Akiva. The Romans were coming after them. And this they want to bring as a raya. The Reb Shurgain does not say, interestingly enough, does not add that last phrase of Kulam Mesu Misara Askara. All it says was Vayashemada. This is one raya to this approach. The scholar, the Shtickle Torah, that they died not through Askara. Askara is only Gadata, is only illusion, but they really died through the Shemada of the Romans. One raya. Second raya, you can see is, I don't know if we have the Ders Rishonim here. Let's see what else we have. No, let's go. Minig not to do malacha. Okay, a lot of the stuff we read already. No, go back earlier. I think there was one page earlier. I'm going to be Messiah and sum it up and leave the item to, if they wish to do further picture of some cipher. Well, before the shir going, one page before. Okay, if you look there, Isa Brecht's Rabbah, Rabbi Akiva, he says, Kol Mesa he brings the Avraham, brings the Sefer Manik, and look at the last paragraph, okay. Anira came Tam Achar. He says, Yaiser Nachav and Nekel, the Isi Birashalmi, Rabbi Akiva Kavachambar Kaziva B'Deinu Malka Mashicha. This is a big clear because the mission didn't have Yerushalmi. So here's the Makar. Now, the Mishnah's Kasha is on the Rambam's words, Noisei Kalev shall ben Kaziva, whatever that means, whether it has a military implication or otherwise not clear. But here's a very sure Shalmi that Rabbi Kiva clearly said, called him Mashiach, which we know. Betachas Ragov Neged Chayel Oive Mashatach B'Shaltam B'Tzar Gedela. He gives him a guy, his entire yeshiva of 24,000 younger light to join the Merid Bal Chaycha. Isaiah Chayel Gadol Chaycha Gadol Ma'id. 24,000 people. A Roman legion, I believe, if I remember, I think had 10,000. I'm sorry, apologize. A Roman legion had 9 to 10,000 people. So 24,000 people was a huge number. So this was a whole Roman, the size of 2 Roman legions. And this was a army worthy. The Romans fought back, and Vespasianus was the Chum Nabais. The Caesar sent his best legions to wipe out the Mered, and all the Talmidim of Rabbi Kiva. And the day they stopped, and the day they were brought to Gevurah was Lav Yom Efsher. The Efsher. This is the Efsher. The Efsher. Hadrian, thank you. Maybe one day they won a victory. So he says, this is the theory. And he brings a Chashaviyid, the Rav Posen, and this is as far I heard from him too. In times of Nacham Yashar, Hare Nihirik Yachlag Weimar Chayzer is to return the suit. If that's the case, why are we not going back after Leg Weimar? Just because it was a one-time victory? Why would that work? Okay, so he works with the Svara. Is this the only page we have? If it's the last page, and then we'll take it one more page, is it? I don't remember. No, this is a guy's version. I can't remember. Say Harbi Yosef Mimash Amarti Lechem on this Svara. Yes, boy, if you want, you can see there's a sefer, a book, I'm not sure, called B'neach Agodos, which has a lot of this information written up, including this Hasharis about the Nashim, which to me is totally together Hasharis, but the theory seems to have taken hold in many legitimate places. Akadekach, that it was mentioned by Rav Henkin as a legitimate theory, talking to one of the great Chaykim Taranim of our time that many of you know, but I don't have just to say his name, so I'll leave it out. He says, if you look in the area here, Rav Kiva Muhammad, he says, he talks about how the Romans came, and Bar Kaziva, Halchim Chayil Chayil Chayil. It's one more paragraph here, bring it down. B'yameim Tar Rabbi Kiva. Kiva thought that Bar Kaziva's original victories were Iksa Mashiach, and he says that when Kaziva was brought to Laharish Zagayim to bring down the Roman Empire, B'derech Nes, it's the Yerushalmi. As we saw, let's skip the next paragraph. Many of the Goyim joined the Jewish army. Chashav Rabbi Kiva, and the sky b'der Bakasav and Chagai. Oid ma'at hi v'ani maris the Shemai words, as we know from many in Gottesman Chazal, Rabbi Kiva was holding on to the hope that even though the Beis Medrash was only Nechrav 7 years earlier, it would be rebuilt immediately. And he says he sees Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shmuel were killed, and he saw that it's not correct, and the whole thing is over, and therefore, Adkan, what the Deris Rishonim says. Now, if you look in the this is the last page of Deris Rishonim. If you look here, Deris Rishonim doesn't quite say what's attributed to him, both in this scholarly article and alluded to by Rav Henkin. Doesn't say that they joined and they were killed. Muhammad just says Rabbi Kiva did what he did. So far, Deris Rishonim is not any backup to this solicitation. The Deris Rishonim was not necessarily dispositive here. Meir Finken didn't want to really cite the person who was the mechaber of this shtickle Torah, who was a scholar, not from Windsor necessarily. But there is some backup to this, and I'll leave this to you to think about. Rabbi Sai, Yeshua Kayach for listening. We now have a little bit of insight both into the simcha of بعומר. The simcha of بعומer is a simcha satira according to the first mahalach we made. According to the second mahalach, it's a simcha of a victory. However, Purta over the Romans, which of course was reversed. But let's go with the first, that Rav Shimon ben Yochai as the leading disseminator of Torahs, the combination of Torahs Nigla and Torahs Nistar, his Yom Simcha, the day that he started learning Torah from Rabbi Akiva, is like Gimel بعומر. That is the reason for the Simcha. The Ebshel Helfen that the Simcha of tomorrow night of بعומר should be the Spasha. There should be Simchas in all Yechidim and Klal Yisrael, and Simchais Bechlal for all of Bnei Chugenu.